guys have not been paying attention, the House GOP is in a bit of a debacle right now. As it says here, majority Republicans in turmoil, unable to elect House Speaker as McCarthy fails again. They've now done 6 rounds of voting, and McCarthy has still been unable to clinch the speakership. As this article states, House Majority Republicans were unable to elect a speaker as GOP nominee Kevin McCarthy failed on the 6th ballot. Republican foes have kept him from getting close to a majority in the latest round of voting for speaker that is now stretched over 2 days. After the latest tally, the House adjourned until 8 p.m., giving Republicans time to confer on their next steps. 20 Republicans voted for Byron Donalds as an alternative to McCarthy. One Republican, Victoria Spartz from Indiana, voted present. Donalds, 44, one of the few black Republicans in Congress, has represented a Florida district since 2021. And this is like the first time this has happened in, I think, over 100 years. Usually, whoever the appointed or whoever the party decides will be speaker, they just become speaker. Everyone just fucking falls in line. We saw that happen over and over and over again with Nancy Pelosi, of course, which infamously boiled over into a real debate, quite a spicy discourse in 2021 when there was a campaign of pressure from online leftist commentators, people like Jimmy Dore, Brianna Joy Gray, Crystal Ball, Kyle Kalinske, etc., urging the Justice Democrats, people like AOC and Pramila Jayapal, Cori Bush, Ro Khanna, etc., to put up a little bit of a goddamn fight and use their leverage to hold up Nancy Pelosi's speakership, to basically hold her speakership hostage in exchange for some concessions. Now, there was a little bit of debate regarding what those concessions would be. The main one that Jimmy Dore talked about was forcing a vote on the House floor for Medicare for all. There were other suggestions as well as far as what good concessions might look like. But the point is, those progressives at the time, AOC, Cori Bush, all the Justice Democrats basically decided that it wasn't worth their time to seriously resist Nancy Pelosi becoming speaker again. They just decided to go along to get along. They all voted for Nancy Pelosi when push came to shove and basically got nothing in return. Now, 2 years later, it's like deja vu because the Republicans now in control of the House are actually employing the strategy that people like Zach and I were fucking begging progressives in the House to employ back in 2021 in order to resist the corporate, corrupt, anti-progressive leadership of Pelosi. This is interesting for a couple of reasons, but I think that the main reason why it's so interesting for us to talk about is because we're in a situation where we have a handful of Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, basically employing the antagonistic tactics that we were hoping we'd see come from the left flank of the Democratic Party in the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah, so this whole thing is really interesting to me, and I don't even know where to begin to start unpacking it, so I'm just going to dive in head first. When it comes to the decision to just unilaterally kind of coordinate a speaker, whether that's the House majority or minority speaker, I think that there's a big misconception among many people who I don't even know if it's partisan, but just people who cover politics for a living, people who are on the Hill, people who dabble in the swamp or just straight up steep in it, right? Like the people who are in the shits, right? In the weeds, they know what's going on. To them, it's so like, oh my goodness, what a joke, how hysterical the fact that the Republican Party wouldn't just have this figured out, right? Like it wouldn't just be like uniform single file line, let's go in, we're gonna all stand behind the same guy, that there wouldn't be just 100% partisan unity, right? And then the Democrats are taking this moment to say, like, see how successfully we've passed the torch from Nancy Pelosi to Hakeem Jeffries, and see there's no discussion at all. We have our ducks in a row, even with our slim standing and whatnot. Okay, fine. And actually the what's his face will be the majority speaker. I inverted that right now because my head was in the old Congress for a second, right? Or no, Hakeem. Wait, did the Republicans have the House now? Yeah, they have the majority in the House. So he'll be majority speaker, and Hakeem Jeffries will be minority speaker. So I fucked that up when I said that. I'm sorry, guys. But anyway, I just think that meat and potatoes of the point I'm making is the fact that I don't think regular people Joe Blow on the street. One, they don't fucking know the difference between Hakeem Jeffries and Kevin McCarthy. Gun to their head, I don't think they could give you either of their names. I don't think anybody could give you either of their names, right? Which is why I just think it's like, I just think it's perplexing to see so many people come out here and be like, oh, well, you think that the Democrats and the squad should have embarrassed themselves like the Republican Party is embarrassing themselves right now? What fools you are. And I'm like, that's how I know you've never talked to a regular person in your life. Like, you are so steeped in your own political analysis. All you do is talk to people who want to regurgitate like either your echo chamber or some like very different but also very politically informed position. Like, regular people could barely tell you like how you become speaker of the house or what the minority leader of the house is, and they would probably throw some senators in the list of people that they think are up for debate on this. The fact that you think this has any like actual like tangible outcome as far as on voters or whatnot, I think is, or not you, Gavin, but just anybody that's in opposition to this would think it seems a little absurd to me, right? Because most people don't know how the sausage is made in Washington, and they'd prefer it that way. And the thought that it would just, that there wouldn't be any debate would, I think, actually be more eyebrow raising to the people. We kind of had this conversation the other day. The thought that there isn't any debate over who will be the Democrats' choice for speaker is actually more eyebrow raising, more concerning to your average Joe, because that doesn't sound like politics. That doesn't sound like democracy. That doesn't sound like debate. It's like, oh, it sounds like a coronation. And that's not something that we go with. So I don't know. All of the like pearl clutching, like the Republicans are in so disarray. I don't think that's going to have an ounce of impact on how the Republicans perform moving forward. I think that what it does show to the public is, unfortunately, that there is like, and again, I'm no simp for the Republican Party. I think Republicans are by and large dramatically worse for the country than Democrats almost across the board. But what it shows to the country, what people who are perceiving just these actions in limited scope that they are, is that, oh, these guys are actually fighting for what they believe in. They don't agree with this person, and they're going to put their money where their mouth is. They're going to put their foot down, right? And what they see from the Democrats is, ha 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 ha, you're actually trying to have your voice heard in Congress. You're actually exercising your power as a congressperson. What a joke. Like, in the Democratic Party, we always just fall in line. Like, we always just do what we're told. And I can't imagine how badly your brain has to be warped for you to think that that's actually a good thing for Democrats. Like, for people to just think that they're like so brainwashed into doing exactly what the leadership tells them. Like, no, that's actually a bad idea. And for these people to withhold their votes and embarrass these people amongst the, hoity-toities in the political swamp, that's fine, because that doesn't have any impact on the regular working people. That's actually a great way to extort from them, because they don't want to be personally embarrassed, right? That's a big tool in politics. But this idea that oh my gosh, if we'd forced the vote, we'd be in the same boat that the Republicans are in. Like, what are you talking about? Then we would know who's serious about Medicare for all. We would know who's serious about actually supporting this and isn't just using it to fundraise, to pretend to be a progressive, a true faux-gressive, right? And we would also have shown Nancy Pelosi that if she wants to retain power, and don't kid yourself, guys, she pulled all the strings. Hakeem Jeffries is her chosen heir, all of that kind of shit, right? We would have shown them that they actually have to negotiate with us, and we wouldn't have gotten fucked off with the $15 minimum wage and the parliamentarian, perhaps. You know what I'm saying? At least they would have shown that there was some gumption there. There's some backbone. And now it's just like, everybody's like, see, force the vote didn't happen. Ha. And it's like, well, now what do we have? We have a completely feckless, fucking uninspiring group of people who, by and large, most of their ardent supporters believe have betrayed them. And even people like Ben Burgis, who, I respect for coming out, and he disagrees with us, and that's fine. He shares it. I like Ben. He's a great guy. He always comes on our show and, articulates his disagreement. He's allowed to have a different position than us. But even he will say, like, yeah, the squad's not very inspiring. They haven't given us much to sink our teeth into. They haven't given us much to, show that they fought. So even their most like sympathetic audiences is kind of like uninspired by them. So I don't understand how this is a W.
Right. And the conversation you're kind of referring to is one that happened on Twitter today between the Vanguard and a couple different people that had differing opinions, one of which was Ben Burgis, as you mentioned. Also, Dylan Burns got into a little bit of a Twitter debate with Dylan over this subject matter. And as I said here, whatever you think of them, Jimmy Dore, Breonna Joy Gray, Kyle Kulinski, and Crystal Ball were all correct in their advocacy for House progressives to force the vote in 2021. It was asking the bare minimum of them to vote against Pelosi and demand concessions in exchange for their vote, much like how we now see the 20 GOP Congress people holding up Kevin McCarthy's speakership and in return extracting various concessions, although concessions that are far less serious and substantive and legitimate than the ones that the left flank Congress members would have fought for, such as a floor vote for Medicare for all, among other progressive priorities. I went on to say, it's truly embarrassing that moronic fascist GOP Congress people have more balls than the Justice Democrats who were specifically elected to resist Pelosi and dim leadership. And we got a response from Dylan Burns, who we've talked to on the Vanguard. We debated him about Russia, Ukraine. Overall, I think, he's a nice guy. And he's, free to have his own opinion on the situation. But he says, I don't know how you see the Republican Party humiliating itself on the national stage right now. And the conclusion you take away from that is that the Democrats should have done that as well. All to get a vote on something that everyone knew had zero chance of passing anyway. And, to your point, Zach, your average voter doesn't really view this as terribly humiliating, right? Unless they're just watching MSNBC all day and kind of absorbing their opinions.
I'd go even further and say they don't know what's happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're, like I said, if you're watching MSNBC, if you're watching cable news all day, you're definitely going to be hearing about this. But yeah, as far as just your average person, they don't know what the fuck is going on, nor do they care. This isn't something that they view as deeply embarrassing. It's not going to prevent them from voting Republican in the future if they're inclined to do so. If you're someone that's traditionally a Republican voter and then you watch this going down, them humiliating themselves on the national stage, it's not going to prevent you from casting another vote for the Republican Party, right? You're going to vote for them regardless of who the fuck is the Speaker of the House.
Do you think that those people because at this point we're talking about Republican voters, right? We're talking about those. Do you think they even see it as humiliating? Because I genuinely don't. And maybe I'm on an island here, and maybe this is like my weird right-winger take, and everybody's gonna like come at me for it, and that's fine. Because I genuinely think this. I genuinely just don't see how putting your foot down and saying I'm not voting for this person who I don't want is like humiliating. I don't think that in a representative democracy that's something that a regular voter would walk out and say like, oh, fuck that guy.
Well, it's not humiliating to your average voter, and I totally agree with that. I do think it's humiliating within the Washington elite.
Okay, fair, yeah.
And it does show that the Republican caucus is in disarray. It does show that there's a lack of leadership and that there's a civil war going on. This is fairly unprecedented in a modern American history. As I mentioned earlier in the stream, I think it's been 100 years since the speakership has gone to multiple rounds of balloting or voting in order to make a determinative decision. This is not something that usually happens. So it is embarrassing for that reason, just because of the unprecedented nature of it and the fact that it shows that the Republican Party doesn't have control of its own caucus and that their caucus is kind of in disarray. But as I point out to Dylan, because he says, like, you think the Democrats should be humiliated just like the Republicans are being humiliated? To which I say, of course, yes, that's the fucking point. I say, yeah, it is embarrassing for the GOP, specifically within the Washington elite. It is embarrassing for them. And I think that Pelosi and the Democratic Party should also be embarrassed. Like, Nancy Pelosi is not our fucking ally. The Democratic Party is not our fucking ally as a progressive movement, as a socialist movement. These people are our enemies just as much as the fucking GOP. So why do you not want them to be embarrassed? Why is their humiliation something that is of concern to you? I thought we were on the same page as, Bernie Kratz or progressives or, democratic socialists or whatever you want to call yourself. People on the left, I thought we were all in agreement that Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party leadership should be fucking not only humiliated, but defeated. Downright fucking defeated. And again, they have failed to consider progressive policies that are massively popular, not only among the Democratic Party constituency, but also among the American people at large. It's a bipartisan conclusion among American voters that people want universal health care, that the policies that Bernie Sanders ran on and inspired, the largest political movement in fucking recent American history or whatever, at least among the youth, these policies are being completely ignored by the Democratic Party. That was the point of Force the Vote. That was the point of trying to pressure Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party leadership in a last-ditch effort to bring this fucking bill to the floor, to refocus the national conversation and the discourse around this policy that is so vitally necessary and which was being completely ignored, mostly due to corruption from the leaders of the party, which weren't being resisted by the so-called left flank. So my point to Dylan and people saying this is yes, I do think that the Democrats should be humiliated. Fuck the Democrats. My problem with the squad is that they let the Democrats off the hook. My problem with AOC and Ro Khanna is that they don't fight back, is that they're not antagonistic in the same way that the Republican Freedom Caucus members are being right now. And that's not to say that the Freedom Caucus members are, fighting for good things. No, the things they're fighting for are pretty stupid. With a few exceptions, they're stuff that the American people don't give a fuck about. All I'm saying is that the same tactics and the same antagonistic energy should be harnessed by the left to do good things. They don't have to do bad things. They can fight for good things. That's the point of being on the left instead of the right.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to point out to Dylan here, right? Because we'll move into his second tweet that he responds here, and he kind of insinuates. This is how you know that you're dealing with some things that are like the goalposts are moving, right? And I don't talk on Twitter, so if Dylan sees this, I hope you don't take this the wrong way that I'm just responding to you fucking from our show, but I don't have any problem with the guy disagreeing with us at all. Like, he's allowed to fucking make his opinions, right? Would that be more embarrassing than the risk of what is happening now, the risk of a different speaker being elected? I would have loved basically anybody but Nancy Pelosi to be speaker. Why? Because that would have humiliated Nancy Pelosi. And also, she just wasn't going to let it happen. I mean, dimes to dollars. That lady was not going to have the speakership stolen from her. She was only going to divorce herself from it and coronate someone new. Okay, so if it had gone to absolutely anybody, it would have been Hakeem Jeffries, and look at where we are now, right? Nobody else would have, who else would have gotten it? Who is this more right wing? And also, how do you govern more right wing as a Democrat than Nancy Pelosi? Are you saying that they would have found some random ass congressman that has politics like Joe Manchin that's just going to be the fucking 2023 Joe Lieberman, 2021 if you were going back to when fucking Force the Vote was originally hashed out? Like, no. The whole point of the vote, and also, like, you're not shattering anybody with breaking news that it wouldn't have passed, right? This is the whole point of Force the Vote. Let me just lay it out for everybody so that we can't pretend that it was anything else. And also, I remember when everybody on the anti-Force the Vote team were saying that the Speaker of the House was going to become Kevin McCarthy when if they didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi. So I see how you guys are moving the goalpost over here. I remember when everybody, it's Kevin McCarthy, and I can pull up tweets. We've done it like on a million of our fucking episodes. Okay, so we already established that it couldn't be Kevin McCarthy. Who then in the Democratic Party is more right-wing than Nancy Pelosi? Somebody without an ounce of her clout, right? All of the people that are more right-wing than Nancy Pelosi can't shuffle shit through a fucking Congress, right? And then they would have, and if the squad had forced the vote, if they had said, we're not voting for you, they would have voted for Medicare for all, and they would have said, we are the only people here fit to represent you. And then in the midterms, they would have had much more success primarying them. Instead, what did AOC do? They fell in line. They didn't force the vote. They finger wagged us. They said that they were going to get expansions for shit like Cobra or whatever the hell, and then fight for the $15 minimum wage. I don't give a fuck about expansion to Cobra. It leaves too many people behind. It's a non-issue, and the $15 minimum wage didn't even happen. Okay, so we have to talk about that. Then let's talk about the fact that AOC took a bunch of the fucking money that had been donated to her, and they donated it to people that were basically the Joe Crowleys of the 2020 cycle, right? Or the 2022 cycle, excuse me, right? I remember specifically, we had good friend of the show, Eva Putsova, on, who was running in 2020 against Tom O'Halloran. She didn't even run again in 2022 because Tom O'Halloran was getting money from AOC. This dude is the epitome of like a Joe Crowley Democrat, okay? So that's what they've been up to. We haven't gotten any concessions from Joe Biden at all. Climate change is getting worse. It was like fucking 60 degrees outside in Kansas City yesterday. Washington, D.C. is beautiful right now, and it's the wintertime. It's January. Okay, so we don't have time to waste. We would have known that we could have gotten these assholes out of office and then replaced them with some people that were actually serious. That was what could have happened with forced to vote. What were the risks? That Nancy Pelosi gets embarrassed? That fucking we end up with Hakeem Jeffries instead of Nancy Pelosi in the speakership? No, that's a fake risk. I guarantee you Nancy Pelosi would have never let herself lose. She would have fucking done the floor vote, shoot the hostage if you have to, and end up with Hakeem Jeffries. How's that any worse than we are now? How's that any worse than we are now? And also from the fucking anti-force to vote people, what's your plan to extract goddamn anything from the squad? Anything at all. I'm talking about a literal $15 minimum wage, something that a Republican state like Florida overwhelmingly voted for. You can't get that. You can't get anything. The only thing that fucking I think Dylan gives a shit about, and no offense, Dylan, I'm pretty sure the only thing you give a shit about is sending money to Ukraine. And as long as that's happening, you're going to cheerlead the Democratic Party, which is where we differ. Okay? I would rather see them doing shit domestically here than voting for some fucking $30 billion more to go to fucking Ukraine, right? That doesn't win me any point. That doesn't win them any points with me.
Exactly correct. And there's another exchange that I wanted to spotlight as well between the Vanguard and Ben Burgis, who's also a friend of the show. We've had some good conversations with Ben. I think he's on point when it comes to various, subject matters. We find a lot of common ground on different topics, but apparently not this one, right? So once again, I tweeted that like him or hate him, Jimmy, Brianna, Kyle, Crystal, they were correct. The squad should have been doing 2 years ago what the Freedom Caucus is now doing. Ben Burgis responds and says, I don't get this reaction. I'm sympathetic to the general idea that they should be way more antagonistic to leadership, but I've never understood what forcing a vote was supposed to accomplish. Seems completely pointless at best, counterproductive at worst. So basically getting hung up on this idea that, well, even if they did force a vote, and even if there was a vote on the House floor for Medicare for all, it would have failed. It would have failed. So why bother? What's the point? It's going to be pointless at best, counterproductive at worst. To that, we responded, how is them using their leverage to refocus the conversation on Medicare for all and other progressive priorities pointless? They should relish the opportunity to embarrass their party leadership for refusing to consider policies that are massively popular within the Democratic constituency. And as I said earlier, not just the Democratic constituency, but actually the entire voting public, Republicans, independents, Democrats alike, progressives, whatever. Everyone wants universal health care. Go talk to a working class person and ask them if they're, fine and dandy with the healthcare status quo in this country. You're not going to hear that. Either way, another important part of this conversation, I think, that sometimes gets lost in translation when we're talking about the floor vote for Medicare for all and why that was an important ask, is this all went down right in the wake of Bernie Sanders getting fucked over by the Democratic Party for a second time, losing the nomination to Joe Biden. And we had this massive movement behind Bernie Sanders, but not just Bernie Sanders, behind the policies that he stood for, behind Medicare for all specifically. And when Bernie Sanders got shivved in the fucking back by the Democrats for the second time, and they all dropped out, and Obama got on the phone, and they all united behind Joe Biden, it was so goddamn depressing for the progressive movement, because all of a sudden, what seemed like this massive movement, what seemed like all of this energy that had materialized behind these policies, chiefly Medicare for all, it seemed like it just all fucking dissipated overnight. And to a lot of people like Zach and I, that pissed us off. It made us so angry, and it was so frustrating to watch happen, because these are policies that are very important to us in our personal lives and to the people we know, and we're actually in the struggle because we care about these policies getting passed. And to see all that energy just evaporate overnight because the Democrats got Bernie out of the way, and Bernie just kind of sheepishly excused himself, it was depressing as fuck, right? And we were hoping that the elected representatives of the progressive movement in Congress, people like AOC, we were hoping they would be just as pissed off as we were, and that they would take that energy and turn it into an antagonistic resistance to the Democratic Party leadership that was in part responsible for that movement being destroyed in the first place. So it's not just like randomly out of nowhere, someone was like, hey, you should vote for this bill that's not going to pass. No, the point was to keep the fight going, to keep the movement alive, to keep the conversation focused on this vital policy, which results in the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans every goddamn year. It's a fucking national embarrassment. It's a disgrace that this occurs. A fucking genocide of poor people every single year, completely preventable. And the point of forcing a vote for Medicare for all was, as I said here, to refocus the conversation, to get people talking about this, to hold the Democratic Party leadership responsible and accountable, and not just let them forget, and not just let them move on, and not just let the whole nation just fucking move on to the next thing. Because like I said, for a second there, it really seemed like we had a goddamn chance to get these policies passed, or to at least get a president that was sympathetic to these policies passed. And then all of a sudden, overnight, bam, done, no more. And to see the progressives in Congress, the AOCs, the Ro Khannas, the Cori Bushes, the people that ran on and were elected in order to get these policies passed, to see them just give up and walk away sheepishly with their fucking tails tucked between their legs, because they didn't want to offend Nancy Pelosi and they didn't want to see negative articles in the press about them. To see them give up that fucking easily, instead of just doing a simple goddamn thing of voting against a corrupt corporatist speaker that is diametrically opposed to their political positions, or at least their stated political positions. It was so fucking disappointing and so revealing as to the true nature of these elected officials, and the fact that they weren't actually willing to fight for us. They weren't actually willing to put their careers on the line in order to refocus the conversation on this policy that I thought we all agreed was important.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the Obamification of the squad, right? Or at least that's the slogan I've decided to adopt for it, right? Like this idea that these people who ran on their version of hope and change in healthcare, right? Which is essentially what Obama peddled to us in fucking, I mean, literally, it's what Obama peddled to us in 2008, that all of the squad members and Bernie Sanders had a more radical, more visceral, more authentic approach on it, at least rhetorically. But here we are. And you know, your worst fears that you laid out in that diatribe of yours, which I completely agree with, Gavin, is where we are now, right? Wasn't the whole point to make sure these issues stayed at the forefront of the conversation? Now they've disappeared. Now they are gone. There is no conversation. In fact, it's been entirely fucking petered out, right? Like a fucking fire on a rag that you stamped out with your fucking foot. It's just gone. It's out. It's miserable. It's fucked. Now we're back. It honestly feels like we've gone through a time warp. We're back in 2008. We're fighting for the bare minimums. We're fighting for the crumbs. I'm talking about Joe Biden on a daily basis. There is constant, fear and anxiety from the queer community about whether or not their rights are going to be taken away. There is a fucking surge of anti-Semitism and radical evangelical Christianity that is emerging. Like, what the hell happened? Is it fifth grade again? I don't know. And then on top of that, the left just can't get any of our shit together, right? Like, we are now so distracted by the things that by the issues we'd thought we'd laid to rest, these cultural issues that we'd hoped we'd settled, right? Gay marriage, right? Just basic acceptance on the, matter of race. Just these little hurdles that now it's all that. And it's like, okay, no, now, what are you talking about? Like, and we've known, honestly, for the longest time that we had to address the police issue, right? That's never been addressed in this country. But, at least like more casual racism, which I feel like has reared its head again as something that like more people or anything. It's all been a regression. There's been no forward movement since 2016. Nobody's opened the public minds about a more like left-wing. So I don't know. We've just had nothing but regression for a long time. For 7 years. 7 years, it's been basically regression. I know 2020, we felt like we were getting closer. I felt like we were getting closer. I've never been more inspired than the night of the Nevada primary and the 2020 primaries. You know what I'm talking about, Gavin.
Yep.
Bernie had won the first 3 primaries: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada. And I was amped about it. I was fucking amped about it. We were doing the Vanguard blog at that point. So Gavin and I, we would both stay up really late, respectively, in our own apartments back then, and just like fucking write in the middle of the night. And then we would edit each other's shit and publish it. And nobody was reading it. We were stoked if like fucking 15 people favorited the tweet, but it was just an exciting time. We were pouring out all of our thoughts. We were laying the groundwork for what this show would become. It was just our raw obsession with everything that was happening in the project that was American, socialist politics, right? And now it's nothing but losses and L's since then. It's nothing but heartache and defeat. And this isn't an easy road, it's a hard row we hoe, as they say, right? And honestly, Olayemi Olerin put it, in a way that was, I guess sobering, but also realistic, right? Like, this isn't a new battle. Like, we're all part of like a historic lineage. People have been fighting for this since before we came around. And unfortunately, people are going to be fighting for it after we're gone. It's all about making strides. It's all about, doing X, Y, and Z to leave it better than we left off. But the problem is that it sucks to watch a movement of mass popularity of all different backgrounds of people come together over this project and then just have it fizzle out, right? And
Right.
I feel like the reason that people refuse to let Force the Vote die, people are always like, why the fuck do you keep talking about this? I even started this show. I was like the dead horse guard because it sucks to keep talking about this. I wish we didn't have to. I literally do. I like
Same.
rolled my eyes a bunch when Gavin was like, yeah, do you want to react to this? And I was like, I know we have to because like people want to hear about it, but I'm already done. I was done like a year ago talking about this. I was like, a year ago, I was like, oh, well, fuck, it was a year ago. Fucking, and now we're 2 years in where people are, anyway, I'm as done as the next guy when it comes to talking about this. But the reason we hang on to it is it's because it's like, Joan Didion famously wrote that the Charles Manson murders ended the 60s, right? Like the day of the of the Tate massacre. That was the end of the 60s. I feel like Force the Vote was the end of the Bernie Sanders movement.
Yep.
End of the Bernie Sanders movement. When Gavin and I are old men, and hopefully we've built this show up into something that we could at least like get interviewed for like a fucking made for TV documentary. And they're like, when was the end of the Bernie Sanders movement? I'm going to lean back and, I'm going to like hit my oxygen because I've smoked too much weed. And I'm going to be like, Joan Didion once wrote, and then I'm gonna fucking lay out what I just laid out for you guys. So anyway,
Right. No, 100%. And and that was why it was such a pivotal moment. Basically, what it represented, and all of us realizing that no, the squad members were not going to fucking continue the revolution. The progressives in Congress were not going to save the day and actually fight for us. There was no cavalry. We're all just fucked. And like you said, we've basically reverted back to like a pre-Bernie Sanders political climate now, where we're talking about fucking gay marriage, something that was supposed to have been settled long ago, instead of Medicare for all or free college or any of these, progressive ideas that were popularized in large part thanks to Bernie Sanders and his political revolution. But yeah, let's take a look at just what else Ben Burgis had to add to this discussion.
I'm gonna piss really quick while you let the good people know.
Go for it, man. Ben responds and says, "I don't see how a floor vote would have done that. If anything, I think it would have done the opposite and made it easier to marginalize Medicare for all advocacy," which is another frequent talking point you hear from people that were against force the vote. Again, this notion of like, why bring it to a floor vote if it's likely going to fail anyway? Won't that just kind of beleaguer the movement even further to suffer yet another defeat on the floor of the House? And to that I respond and say, regardless of the end result of the vote, they could have gone on every show that would have them to chastise Nancy Pelosi publicly for not embracing Medicare for all. And in that process, widen the Overton window and refocus the conversation around their priorities like a real left flank should. Again, that's the point of the fucking left flank. That's the point of having a progressive movement present in Congress. Obviously, we're not going to get fucking Medicare for all with Joe Biden as president. Obviously, no one thought that. I honestly don't think a goddamn person thought that shit. I don't think Jimmy thought that. I don't think Kyle thought that. I don't think Brianna thought that. I don't think anyone advocating for force the vote actually believed that it would lead to Medicare for all being, written into law, right? I really genuinely don't think that was anyone's anyone's idea. We all knew that it wasn't going to succeed and that it would fail in the House, even if it was brought to the floor. But the point is that the process of doing that gives these progressive Congress people who are supposed to be movement leaders the opportunity to go out there on all these mainstream platforms, MSNBC, CNN, wherever, whoever, and shout from the fucking rooftops, chastising leadership, chastising Nancy Pelosi, accentuating the contrast in policy between the progressives and the corporatists. That's the whole fucking point of being in Congress as a lefty. That's the whole fucking point of having a left flank in the halls of Congress. Obviously, without Bernie Sanders as president, I don't think anyone was under the illusion that Medicare for all actually would have been written into law under Joe Biden, unfortunately. But that fight still has to continue. Just because Joe Biden is president doesn't mean you just fucking give up and sit on your hands and pretend like you're, powerless and defenseless. No, you fight for what's right, regardless of whether or not you think it's actually going to fucking happen or be enacted in the next 2 to 3 years. Like, no, you got to keep the snowball rolling. You got to keep the energy alive, and you got to keep people talking about this policy, or else the energy will dissipate and people will move the fuck on, as they unfortunately have. Again, you got to think about the Overton window in a situation like this.